The episode was called The New Susie. It begins on a normal morning. Peppa gets ready for school, has breakfast with her family, and walks along the path to school. The weather is calm and everything seems normal. Peppa is smiling because she is excited to see her best friend, Susie Sheep. But when she arrives in the schoolyard, she immediately notices that something feels different. Susie is standing a little away from the other children. She is wearing dark sunglasses, even though the sun is not very bright. She doesn't wave to Peppa or run up to her like she usually does. She just stands there quietly, looking in Peppa's direction. Peppa walks closer and says, "Hello, Susie." Susie slowly turns her head and replies, "Oh, hello, Peppa." Her voice sounds calm, almost too calm. Peppa is surprised. Usually Susie laughs right away and starts talking about something exciting. Peppa asks why she is wearing sunglasses. Susie answers, "Because now I'm different." Peppa isn't sure what that means. During the lesson, Susie behaves strangely. She sits very straight and barely speaks. When the teacher asks a question, Susie answers calmly and briefly. During recess, the other children gather around her. Pedro says Susie looks very cool now. Rebecca agrees, but Peppa begins to feel uneasy. It seems like Susie has become distant, almost like someone else. Peppa tries several times to talk with her like before. She suggests playing games and running around the playground, but Susie answers only with short replies or stays silent. Sometimes she just looks at Peppa through the dark glasses, her expression barely changing. Peppa starts to feel a strange tension she can't explain. After school, Peppa invites Susie to come to her house. She hopes things will go back to normal there. Susie stays quiet for a moment and then says, "All right." When they arrive, George runs to the door with his dinosaur and happily says, "Susie." But Susie only replies softly, "Hello, George," and slowly walks into Peppa's room. Peppa takes out her toys and suggests playing. But Susie sits quietly and barely laughs. She occasionally looks around the room and adjusts her sunglasses. The house feels strangely quiet. Peppa begins to speak more carefully. "Susie, are you okay?" Susie turns toward her and says, "I'm just the new Susie." Peppa looks at her and softly replies, "I like the old Susie better." For a few seconds, Susie says nothing. Then she slowly takes off her sunglasses and suddenly starts laughing like before. "I was joking," she says. "I just wanted to try being cool." Peppa smiles with relief. George shows his dinosaur, and Susie starts playing with them again. The room feels normal and cheerful once more. In the evening, Susie says goodbye and walks home along the path. Peppa waves from the door and goes back inside. But as Susie walks away, she quietly puts the dark sunglasses back on. Her smile fades. Softly, she says to herself, "The new Susie." She slowly turns her head and looks back toward Peppa's house. At that moment, Peppa is watching her from the window. Their eyes meet for a second. Susie gives a small smile, but this smile looks very different from the one she had before. The episode was called The New House. It begins in the morning as the pig family moves into their new home. The house is big, bright, and a little unfamiliar. Peppa, George, Mummy Pig, and Daddy Pig walk inside and start looking around the rooms. Daddy Pig happily says that the house has plenty of space for playing, and Mummy Pig smiles and says that now everyone will have more room. George immediately runs down the hallway with his dinosaur and happily says, "Dinosaur!" Peppa is excited at first too, but she feels that the house is a little too quiet. While Mummy and Daddy unpack boxes, Peppa decides to explore the house. She walks down a long hallway and looks at the doors to different rooms. The house is very quiet, and the only sound she hears is her own footsteps. Suddenly, somewhere upstairs, she hears a small noise. Creak. Peppa stops and listens. She looks up at the staircase. "Mummy? Peppa asks quietly. But nobody answers. From the kitchen, she can hear the normal sound of dishes. Peppa slowly walks up the stairs to the second floor. There are several rooms. She looks into one room. It's empty. She looks into another. Also empty. Then suddenly, she hears another sound. Tap. It sounds like someone gently knocked on the wall. Peppa frowns a little. Maybe it's just the house, she says to herself. She walks farther down the hallway. At the end of the hallway, there is a small window. Outside, the wind is gently moving the branches of a tree. When the branches touch the wall, they make a soft sound. Tap, tap. Peppa looks at the branches. Oh, it's the tree, she says. But just as she is about to leave, she hears another creak, this time from downstairs. Peppa quickly walks down the stairs. George is sitting on the floor playing with his dinosaur. George, did you hear that noise? Peppa asks. George looks up. Noise? Yes, like someone walking. George looks around and says, Dinosaur? Peppa smiles, but she still feels a little strange. Later in the evening, Peppa walks through the hallway again. The house is darker now, and the windows reflect the light from the lamps. Once again, she hears a quiet sound. Creak. Peppa stops. Who's there? She asks softly. Just then, Daddy Pig walks out of a room. Peppa, what's the matter? He asks. Peppa looks a little embarrassed. I think someone is in the house. I keep hearing strange sounds. Daddy Pig smiles and explains calmly. In new houses, floors, walls, and doors sometimes creak. The house is just getting used to its new family. Mummy Pig walks over and adds, sometimes the wind moves branches or windows. Those are normal sounds. Peppa starts to relax. So it's just the house? Daddy Pig laughs. Of course. Sometimes our imagination makes sounds seem scarier than they really are. Peppa looks around the hallway and slowly nods. I guess it's just imagination. But when the family walks back into the living room, the camera stays in the empty hallway for a moment. A quiet creak can be heard again. The episode ends with Peppa looking back at the hallway and quietly saying, I guess it's just imagination. But she still looks a little unsure. The episode was called The New School. It begins on an ordinary morning. Peppa is getting ready for school. She has breakfast with her family and puts on her backpack. George waves to her and says, Bye, Peppa. And Mummy reminds her to listen carefully during lessons. Peppa happily walks along the path to school, thinking it will be a normal day. When she arrives, she notices that the school building looks a little different. It still looks like her school, but it seems slightly bigger. The windows look taller, and the door looks a little wider. Peppa stops and looks at the building. Maybe I just didn't notice before, she says to herself. She walks inside and goes to her classroom. Her friends are already there. Susie, Pedro, Rebecca, and the other children are quietly talking. Madame Gazelle stands at the board. Good morning, children, she says. Good morning, Madame Gazelle, the children answer. The lesson begins normally. They draw, read, and answer questions. But Peppa begins to notice something strange. When Pedro raises his hand to answer a question, he says exactly the same words he said yesterday. Even his voice sounds the same. Peppa frowns quietly. During recess, the children go outside. Susie says, Let's play! But she says it exactly the same way she did yesterday. Peppa stops. Susie, didn't we play this yesterday? Peppa asks. Susie smiles and replies, We always play here. Peppa isn't sure what she means. After recess, the children go back into the classroom. The lesson continues, but Peppa notices something else strange. The clock on the wall hardly moves. The minute hand stays almost in the same place. Peppa looks at the clock, then at the teacher. Madame Gazelle, what time is it? Peppa asks. The teacher calmly replies, It's time to learn. Peppa looks a little confused. When the lesson ends, the children stand up and walk toward the door. Peppa is the last one to leave. She walks through the door and suddenly stops. In front of her is the same classroom again. The same board, the same desks, the same children. Susie is sitting in her place. Pedro raises his hand, and the teacher says again, "Good morning, children." Peppa slowly sits down at her desk. She begins to feel a little uneasy. "We already did this," she whispers. But the other children just continue with the lesson. Peppa tries to change things. She answers questions earlier than before. She tries to leave the classroom sooner. She even says different words, but everything around her continues almost exactly the same way. When the lesson ends again, she walks to the door very carefully. This time she watches closely where it leads. She opens the door and finds herself in the school hallway. Everything looks normal again. Children are laughing, talking, and getting ready to go home. Susie walks up to Peppa. "Do you want to play tomorrow?" she asks. Peppa slowly nods. "Yes, tomorrow." She leaves the school and looks back at the building one more time. Now the school looks completely normal. When Peppa arrives home, Mummy asks, "How was your day at school?" Peppa thinks for a moment. "A little strange, but it was fine." Daddy smiles and says, "Sometimes school just feels longer than it really is." Peppa smiles too, but she still looks thoughtful. The episode ends with Peppa remembering the classroom for a moment and quietly saying, "I hope tomorrow will be a new day."